Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. An original adaptation written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Part 5. The Bishop's Blessing. In the aftermath of the Green Knight's departure, the hall had been somewhat chaotic. Tables were in disarray, chairs were overturned, and there was panic throughout the group. Eventually, Arthur had been able to restore calm to the crowd, and he called for food and drink to be brought through. Gradually, music and conversation had drifted back into the hall. For Gawain, though, it was something of a blur. He did not feel well. He excused himself as quickly as possible and withdrew to his rooms. The night was dark, but he lit no candles, just sat there in the darkness on the edge of his bed as the room and the world span crazily around him. He kept replaying that sailing stroke of the axe as it severed the head from the Green Man, and that same head telling him that 1 year from now that fate would be his own. He felt sick. He did not know how long he sat there, worrying and fretting away. The embers of the fire crackled softly as they died out, and the wind whistled past his shuttered window. From the hall below he heard the distant sounds of music and conversation, but for Gawain, the same thoughts kept cycling in his mind. Eventually he was interrupted by a soft tapping at the door. Gawain ignored it, hoping the knocker would assume he was asleep, but the knock came again. Again he ignored it, but the knock came again, and Gawain realized it would not stop. Climbing to his feet, still rubbery with shock, he opened the door. Outside stood Bishop Bedtime. "May I come in?" said the old man without preamble. Well, actually, Thank you," said the bishop, pushing into his room. He set about stoking up the fire, and taking a taper, he lit several candles from its flame. From somewhere within the folds of his robe, the bishop pulled out a clay jar of mead and poured a cup, pressing it into Gawain's hand. Seeing the bishop meant business, Gawain sat back down on the corner of his bed, and Bedtime pulled up a chair to face him. "So, my boy," he began, pouring a second cup for himself, "how are you feeling?" Gawain's brain was so busy replaying images of that axe and the disembodied head over and over, the swish of the axe, the sickening thud of the head, the face calling out his death, that some strange automatic politeness within him opened up his mouth and used it to say, "Oh, fine, thank you, Bishop." Swish, thud, death. "Please," said the bishop, "I suspect you are anything but fine. Come, tell me how you are." Swish, thud, death. "Well, I was a little shocked," said the automatic part of his brain that was now in charge of his mouth for the time being. "But I've come to my senses now, and I'll take on the challenge with as much strength as God gives me." Swish, thud, death. "Gawain," said the bishop, a note of steel entering his voice, "how are you?" Gawain was so stunned by the stupidity of the repeated question that he completely dismissed the part of his brain that had been coming up with polite answers and let his thoughts fly loose. "Like I've been punched in ways from Sunday, you stupid old fool. I'm scared out of my mind. How d'you think I feel? I just beheaded a terrifying creature who picked up his own head and told me that I'm next. I've been handed a death sentence. I had plans for this life which involved living a fair bit longer, and you have the nerve to ask me how I am feeling." "Ah," said the bishop in a perfectly reasonable tone, "some honesty." He smiled warmly and his eyes twinkled. "Let us continue in that vein for the rest of our discussion, shall we? And please, oh boy, do take a drink. It really is excellent." Not sure of what to do next, Gawain did take a drink and found it was excellent, and the bishop went on. "Do you know why we celebrate Christmas at this time of year, Gawain?" Gawain was taken off guard by the question. It's the time of year Christ was born, isn't it?" "No," replied the bishop. "We don't actually know for certain when that time was. It most likely was not in the middle of winter, though. If you recall in the story that Joseph was called to his family's hometown of Bethlehem for a census." Gawain nodded. The story was familiar to him. "Well, the Romans knew, as do we all, that travel is not easy in the winter. And what's the point of a census designed to count up all the people if you can't get an accurate count because they're all stranded on the road? No, it's unlikely to have been winter when Christ was born." "I suppose," said Gawain, I suppose I'd never really thought about it before. No? Asked the bishop. No, I suppose you wouldn't have had much cause to. Well, let me ask you another question. What is it that we're celebrating at Christmas? I mean, why have all the feasting and frivolity to begin with? Well, said Gawain, a little confused why the bishop was asking him the question, we celebrate the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ, who would one day grow to be our Saviour. Indeed we are, Gawain, indeed we are, the bishop replied, growing animated. But we are also celebrating the choices made by ordinary people, which paved the way for that birth to be possible. Consider Mary, the mother of Christ. An angel comes to her and tells her that she's been chosen for the blessing of bearing the Son of God himself. Have you ever been visited by an angel, Gawain? I can't say that I have, Father, no, Gawain replied. No, I shouldn't imagine you have. But you have seen unusual things. Things beyond your understanding, though, haven't you? Gawain's mind flashed back to that horse and that rider emerging from the fire, and the head of the green man speaking to him, and he shuddered. Yes, said the bishop, seeing the shudder. Of course you have. Of course you have. Nothing makes a man feel smaller and less significant than that which he cannot explain. Now Mary had such an encounter, and blessing or not, she did not ask for this. She's an unmarried woman, promised to a good man, yes, but without any means of supporting herself. In those times, if she goes to her family, they could well have cast her out on the street for bringing dishonour to the family name. There is a very real possibility that this blessing would result in her being rejected from everyone she knows and everyone she loves, and may even mean her death. She could have refused it, could have held up her hands and said, no, not me, but instead, she takes hold of that task in front of her, trusting that God will work a way. Gawain was quiet. I suppose I've never really thought of it like that, he said eventually. No, replied the bishop, of course not. Because we tell the story already knowing its ending. We have the luxury of remembering the results without having to retrace the steps that led us there. Let me tell you, Gawain, the middle of the story can be a scary place to be. Gawain nodded ruefully. I think I can agree with you there, Father. Of course you can, the old man went on. Of course you can. Now, let's think of Joseph, Mary's fiancé. His wife-to-be comes to him, tells him that she's pregnant. Now, he knows he had nothing to do with it, and she's telling him some story about an angel and the Son of God. Now, what would you think there, Gawain, I suppose I would think she was lying and be done with her. And that's exactly what he does, replied the bishop. Not being a vindictive man, he decides it will be best for all if they break it off quietly, but as far as he's concerned, it's all over and he will live a long, happy life without her. But then he has this dream. In this dream, an angel appeared to him, telling him not to end the relationship and that Mary was telling the truth. Now, what would you think here, Gawain? I'd think it was just a dream and ignore it, to be honest, Gawain replied. Of course you would, said Bedtime. Of course you would. I suspect most of us would in his shoes. Why would he take on all the shame and controversy and difficulty, let alone the pressure of raising the Son of God himself, when he can just decide that it's all a dream and walk away? And yet, he does not. Now, we have 2 records of Joseph having dreams in the Holy Book, Gawain, and both times they saved lives. So these must have been some powerful kind of dream. So, Mary and Joseph choose to set foot on the path placed in front of them, knowing that it will most certainly mean a more difficult life filled with danger, because they choose to believe it was the right thing to do. I see what you're saying, Bishop, said Gawain, some surliness entering his voice again. But it's not quite the same, is it? It's not like I have a choice in this path, is it? Do you not? Asked the old man. What's to stop you riding away from this challenge? Who's forcing you to go and seek out this Green Knight a year and a day from now, eh? Well, no one, I suppose, said Gawain. But if I don't, I shall be shamed all over the land. Everyone shall know I went back on my word, my name will be mud, and I'll be no true knight at all. Compare that to facing the Green Knight again, and I choose... He stopped, suddenly realising what he'd just said, and the bishop raised an eyebrow. Exactly, confirmed Bedtime. You'd choose this path. You see, Gawain, you've already made your choice, because it's the one you believe to be right. Now you must trust that there's some purpose in it being placed before you. And so I'll ask you again, Gawain, why is it that we celebrate Christmas at this time of year, Well, said Gawain, since you asked for honesty, I'd say it's because the old Yule festivals were already at this time of year, and I should imagine the church wanted to take them over. Am I right? Squawked the bishop in a cackling laugh. You have me there, my boy, and of course you're not wrong. But if it were just about claiming pagan festivals for Christ, we could have chosen one in the summer, could we not? Much warmer, plenty to choose from. No, we chose this time because it is good to remember when the season is at its darkest and life seems most bleak, that from the choices of good people, hope can come, and that hope can change the world. He fell silent and drank from his cup, the dancing candle flames reflecting in his smiling eyes. I wish you well on your path, Gawain, he said, standing to leave, and every blessing Christ can offer on the journey before you. He turned towards the door. Father, asked Gawain, and the old man paused as he reached it. I see the purpose in the Holy Mother's path, but what is the purpose of the path placed before me? Ah, said the old man with a chuckle. I'm afraid I cannot tell you that. But if you'll take some advice from an old man, I'll tell you that the purpose of a path is usually something you cannot know until you reach the end of it, and take stock of the lessons you learned along the way. And with that, he closed the door and left Gawain to his quiet contemplation. Gawain drank deeply from his mead, and he found once again that the bishop was right. It really was excellent. Thank you for listening. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is a Settle Stories commission. Written and read for you by Jon Buckeridge. Story consultant was Miriam Sarin. Music was Tectonic by Saedra, downloaded via Uppbeat. It was a Parable Arts production.